Hello, and welcome to another Hip Historian Happy Hour virtual tour. I am Brenda with AARP Arizona. We are the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 plus to choose how they live as they age. With a nationwide presence of nearly 38 million members and approximately 900,000 right here in Arizona, we work to strengthen communities and we advocate for what matters most to our families. Things such as health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. In the month of August, we will lean into AARP's return to in-person local events, volunteering and AARP rewards, and amplifying the call to action for the 50-plus community to deepen connections. AARP has focused on the important work of being a wise friend and a fierce defender for people 50-plus during the COVID-19 pandemic, demonstrating our commitment to their good health and financial security. As we face another summer with pandemic concerns and record inflation, the health and wealth communications continue to be important. Though so, too does connecting with others in the name of health and happiness. We will meet this moment by offering flexibility, returning to free in-person events in local communities, as well as providing virtual experiences where people 50 plus can make connections. You can learn something new and have fun and discover new interest. For more information and these resources, please visit us at aarp.org/local or aarp.az. Enjoy today's session.
Folks, welcome to the show. Get ready to meet your host for the night, Arizona's very own hip historian himself, Marshall Shore.
Hello and good evening. I want to welcome you all to Arizona History Happy Hour. I am so glad that you can make it tonight. Oh, we've got a great show for you coming up. So, so my name is Marshall Shore, and we'll go into a little bit about how I got here in a few minutes. But first off, today is August 18th. So it's kind of interesting because on this date, back in 1868, Adeline Gray, her husband Columbus, 15 wagons, a variety of other family members, as well as all their belongings, as well as their staff, arrived from traveling east, going west. They were looking for gold. And as soon as they got here in the Salt River, they saw this tall, lush grass. And Adeline, being from a farm family, was like, that is indeed the gold we were looking for. So that is where that 15 wagon train stopped. They went on, and we'll talk more about that, but they were kind of pioneer family right here. And so we'll talk a little bit more about them as we go on. And so she was on the original homestead for 52 years. Now, also on the same date, Pierre Jansen, often a French astronomer, used a prism to divide sunlight up and discovered a yellow light that at first he thought was sodium, but it had a different wavelength. It turns out that he had discovered helium. So that's why today is National Discover Helium Day. It is also National Serendipity Day. Now, serendipity is a term for happy accident. And Serendipity Day encourages people to look for and notice those kind of unexpected good things, those joyful things that are always out there. So, I kind of like to think in some ways that's exactly what happy hour is. It's like a chance for you to come along, learn something new and fascinating, and have a great time and kind of a happy accident, and sometimes not so accidental. Now, it is also National Never Give Up Day. Now, it is intended to cultivate a mindset of determination, which helps us all get through those difficult challenges that life throws our way. And it's all about not just motivating yourself, but others and inspiring them to overcome those hurdles. Now, when all that doesn't work, it is also National Pinot Noir Day. So it's a chance for wine lovers to discover an extremely versatile red wine that's known for its high acid, low tannin contents. It pairs well with food. And so, some of you might even be enjoying a glass of it tonight, maybe a bit of food, maybe not. It is also National Fajita Day. And what I think is interesting about this is it kind of alludes to kind of a little bit of our guest that you'll meet in just a few minutes. But it really talks about how some Texas vaqueros were paid part of their funding or part of their payment for work was these scraps of meat. And so they decided to figure out a way to make them tasty. They grilled them on a fire, threw in some vegetables, threw a tortilla on there, and voila, fajitas were born. And now pretty much I would say on the menu of almost any, so many Mexican places, you can now get fajitas. So, all right. So see, there is a lot going on today. So thank you all so much for being here. Now, if this is your first show, you might be wondering, well, what can I expect? Well, we always do a little bit of music trivia. We do From the Vault, which is something that you might not know that's there. You might drive by on a regular basis. Maybe you don't, but it's just kind of a surprising thing. We also do Little Arizona, as well as we do some trivia. We have a beverage, and as well as we always have a special guest. Now, if this is your first time watching, you might wonder, who is that man and why is he on my screen? Well, we're going to talk about exactly how I got here. And it basically is... Oh, and I see Karen is having coconut rum tonight. So, I started off I was in a library in Brooklyn and decided to trade this beautiful Carnegie building for a small little building in South Phoenix over 22 years ago. And so that got me from all that snow and slush to lots and lots of sunshine. And all I kept hearing about were stories. And so, part of it is also the fact that when we got here, we promptly moved into a beautiful 1956 ranch. And it was so many tones of beige. It is now seafoam and cantaloupe, just 2 tones. There's what my kitchen looks like today. All that buttercream yellow tile, appliances that match. So I love my kitchen, and it still works like a charm, because as soon as we got here, everyone said there's no history here. But I knew that wasn't true, because every time I went somewhere, I kept running across so many amazing people, places, and stories. And then there's that post-war boom. After World War II, all those GIs that either were stationed here, trained here, or passed on their way to somewhere else. And after the war, they would be moving here in huge numbers. Many of them looking for a new way of life and changing Arizona forever. I'm also called the hip historian, which means I get to play with Arizona history. So I get to do fun things like we just started this week. I have an intern, and we've been working, doing some things with Local Buzz, which if you've seen, you can actually download that on your phone. You might have seen me talked a little bit about I'm trying to think, what did we do? Oh, we talked about the Claren Hotel and some of the nefarious history that's there. Coming up the end of next month, we're just in the throes of planning a banned book week in an attempt to highlight censorship in many different forms. We are launching at the end of November, another dinner and a seance down in Bisbee at the historic Greenway House. So that will be a fun evening for all. Last week, we did a little short video with Channel 15 that I think may be up next week. As soon as I get the link, I will let everybody know what that is. And then I just found out, I was out visiting a friend and wound up being interviewed for a documentary about Lloyd Kiva-New, who was a Native American fashion designer in Scottsdale. And so it's actually having a benefit, not premiere, but a benefit showing in just a couple days off in Santa Fe. And so I bet it's really good. So look forward to seeing that. Now I see some of you have already found the chat. There is a chat. If there's at any point you want to say something that you don't want to put in the chat, or if the show is over, you can always rush to me on Facebook, Instagram, email, or even through my website. And you know, it would not be a cocktail if it was not for a happy hour and PJ, who brings so much to the table. And so tonight we are featuring, kind of as a topic, one of the booze that we're talking about. So this is actually from one of my favorite restaurants over on Grand Avenue and 15th, Testal, and which is North American Mexican, or Northern Mexico food. And so this is the Sotol Swizzle with a little bit of Sotol, some pineapple juice, some bitters, and some lime juice. So this is a variation from what they do. So let's see if silent. Oh, wait a minute. All right. And there we go. All right. So now we are here at Little Arizona. You know, I talk a big game about being from New York, but I really grew up in a little tiny town in Indiana of about 25 people. So it kind of gives me this, I think, a special affinity for not just a big city, but also a small town. And so we are going to talk about Wilcox, Arizona. Founded in 1880, has a population of just about over 3,500 people, is in Cochise County. And let's see, and according to one of my favorite sources, Arizona Places and Names by Barnes, we know that it was named after General Orlando B. Wilcox. He was commanding of Department of Arizona. He was a Civil War hero, and the town wound up being named after him. So what kind of things can you find in Wilcox? Well, of course, the Rex Allen Museum. If you've ever been there, he was known as the Arizona Cowboy. He was in a variety of films. He did a lot of voiceovers for Disney, including he was in the oh gosh, that Progress, Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, was all him. The Carousel of Progress. So he was in that. And he did a lot of Disney movies. And if you go down to Wilcox, you can visit the Rex Allen Museum. They also have another connection to some Hollywood history. There were 2 movies that were filmed there. Red Rock West, which is kind of an early 90s American neo-noir thriller with Nicolas Cage, Laura Flynn Boyle, and Dennis Hopper, as well as Lonesome Wilcox, which is a story about how a man is failed by a small town, but he decides to lean into that and find his strength in the ability to help others feel less alone. Now, if you go down to Wilcox, you might want to plan to go down in the middle of October when they are getting ready to do the Wilcox Wine Festival, because, you know, they've got lots of vineyards down there. They have lots of great wine. So that's always a fun time. And, you know, they have a lot of different wine festivals coming up. So that's going to be a lot of fun to just kind of see what else is going on in Wilcox. And you can also go visit the oldest store in Arizona, is how they bill the Wilcox Commercial Building, celebrating 132 years this year. It started off as a Norton Stewart building, and it grew because of the Pacific Southern Railroad that was there, and you can still see it today. And if you want a little bit more nature, you can go wander off into the Chiricahuas, where you have like a 17-mile hike walking you can do. There's also a great drive you can do. You can do lots of little hikes. It's about 12,000 acres of land you can kind of go wander through and see an incredible kind of rock wonderland. So many different things to see. All right. And now I'm really excited because we are going to bring on our special guest. Now, I know some of you already may know Shad, but let's talk to him.
Hey, Mark.
Hello.
Howdy. How you doing tonight?
I am good. And yourself?
I'm doing well, thanks. We're enjoying this little break in our triple-digit temperatures here in Dallas, Texas.
I know. It's actually out my window. I can hear some wind rustle, and I'm like, oh, there may be a storm brewing out there. So,
well, it's definitely monsoon time in Arizona.
Indeed. And we're actually getting some rain, which is great because we desperately need it.
Us too.
And so Shad, for those folks that might not know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name's Shad Kvetko, as you can read on your screen. I actually grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and moved to Texas in 2006. I'm part owner of a bar, a mezcaleria here in Dallas called Las Almas Rotas. I own it with my beautiful wife and another partner of ours. And that's about me.
All right. And so you're in Texas right now.
That's correct.
Yep. So that's why I threw in Fajita Day just for you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
All right. So now we're going to do a little bit of trivia. And now we do trivia a little differently here on Happy Hour than some trivias you're used to, where what we'll do is we will go through the questions and the answers, and the multiple choice answers. And then we'll take a little bit of a quick Arizona music break, come back, and then we'll launch into the stories about those answers. And so I guess before we get started, what are you drinking? It kind of sets the tone for what we're chatting about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm enjoying some Bacanota neat. It's really kind of the star of this article, the reason I'm on here, and all this research I've been doing into basically pre-statehood Arizona and Sonora, and the fermented and distilled alcoholic beverages there. So that's what I'm enjoying tonight, neat, and I hope you all have a tasty drink in front of you as well.
I know I do as well. All right. So now when we do trivia, some folks keep track of their trivia. You can do it in the chat session. You can do it on your arm. You can do it wherever you would like. I know if Anita's watching, she's got her special notebook that she has just for all of her trivia answers. And so without any further ado, let's get some trivia going. All right. So number one, which cactus fruit is fermented into an alcoholic beverage by indigenous peoples in the Sonoran Desert? Is it A, prickly pear, B, saguaro fruit, or C, pitaya, or D, all of the above? All right. Well, you're trying to think which of those could they be fermenting. We're going to move on to number two. What did the Hokum use as mulch for cultivating agave in what is now southern Arizona? Was it dried agave leaves? Was it B, rocks, C, mesquite branches, D, cottonwood tree bark? So what do you think they were using as mulch to help cultivate their agave? What year did Bacanota become legal to produce? Was it A, 1933? Was it B, 1992? Was it C, 1941? Or D, 2015? All right. So which year do you think it became legal to produce Bacanota? And that's just what Chad is drinking. All right. What was Pancho Villa's drink of choice? Was it A, mezcal, B, Sotol, C, strawberry soda, or D, tequila? What do you think Pancho Villa's drink of choice was? All right, question 5. When did Bacanota receive its DO, denomination of origin? Was it A, 2000, B, 2010, C, 2019, 2092, or I'm sorry, 19,
Have
C,
another great commercial.
92. I know. I'm like, I should have another drink. It's like, much better. Or D, 1952. See, there you go. That just rolls right off the lips.
Always helps me.
um, all right. Question 6. Sotol is the colloquial name for the Daisy Larian?
Dazzlerian.
Dazzlerian. I was close. Not even. All right. Plant. It's also the name of the spirit produced from that plant and has a DO, which includes 3 states in Mexico: Chihuahua, Coahuila, and Durango. What do they call Sotol that is produced in Sonora? Is it A, Sotol? Is it B, Aguardiente?
Aguardiente.
Aguardiente. Wow, that doesn't roll right off the lips. All right.
You had a lot of it.
I guess, yes, exactly. I haven't had enough. That's the problem. All right. Pomelo or D, nothing. It's not produced there. All right. Question 7. What year was Prohibition instituted in Arizona? Was it A, 1915, B, 1919, C, 1912, or D, 1920? All right. So while you're trying to think, when did people stop drinking in Arizona, or at least legally stop drinking in Arizona? All right. Question 8. Where was the only tequila ever produced outside of Mexico distilled at? Oh, was it Phoenix? Was it B, Douglas? Was it C, Yuma, or D, Nogales? Wow, so where was the only tequila ever produced outside of Mexico? All right. Question 9. How many species of agave can Bacanota be produced from? A1, B5, C10, or D, none? It's not made from agave. All right. Well, you are trying to figure out which agaves are used for Bacanota. We're going to go on to question 10. Which spirit did Julius Goldbaum import into Tucson in the late 19th century to rebottle under his own Preteritary name? Was it A, bourbon whiskey, B, tequila, C, Bacanota, or D, all of the above? All right. Now, normally we would end right here, but we have a bonus question because we know these are going to be kind of hard. So we figured let's give you a little bonus of a question. All right. So, unsurprisingly, Prohibition did not stop people from drinking alcohol. And cheers to... In the Barrio Vieja area of Tucson, a specific type of establishment appeared to cater to those who wanted to drink. These were known as what? A, clandanistos, B, tequila kitchens, C, speakeasies, or D, elected officials' homes. Scandalous. Oh my gosh. All right. So while you are locking in your final answers for those, we are going to go on and take a quick little Arizona music break. And so I thought, since we're talking about Adeline Gray, who had a house, they had property central to really 7th Street. That would have included what would have been Riverside Park and Riverside Ballroom at one point. And so this would have been a premier concert hall and social event space. They started entertaining in the late 1900s, or its early 19 teens. Now, that original structure was washed away in a flood. It kept getting rebuilt. It would burn down. It survived into the 80s under Bob Pete's ownership, who had bought it from Harry Nace, who ran a lot of movie theaters here in town. That was kind of his thing. And so it saw so many national acts going through it. It was really the hub of so much music right here in Arizona. They also would have special nights. And so pretty much in the 50s, if you were Hispanic and you were looking for a date, you possibly found your date right here at Riverside Park. So many friends, their parents got married after meeting at one of those famous dance nights. All right. So now who's ready for some answers? All right. So question 1. Which cactus fruit was fermented into an alcoholic beverage by indigenous peoples in the Sonoran Desert? Oh my gosh, all of them.
Yep, all of the above. They would harvest these fruits, and I don't want to talk about them in the past tense because these people are still among us in Arizona and other states today, and they are still actually, the Tejada Autumn is still harvesting the fruit from the saguaro cactus every year, and fermenting that and consuming it ritually to bring on basically a strong monsoon season.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize they were still doing that. That's great.
Yeah, and that's among some of the things that were fermented. They would also ferment corn. It's a beverage known as tejuino in Mexico. And they would also bake agave and squeeze the juice from that and ferment that. And that was originally what was called vino mezcal.
Ah. All right. So what do the Hokum use as mulch for cultivating agave in what is now southern Arizona? Rocks as mulch? Wait a minute.
Yeah, they would actually use rocks. This past April, I was in Tucson for the Agave Heritage Festival, and I had the good fortune of joining doctors. Joining some of the researchers from Tumamoc Hill, and we went out to an agave cultivation field right at the base of Tumamoc Hill. Paul and Susie Fish are the doctors' names, and it was interesting because to the untrained eye, it just looked like the Sonoran Desert. But under their guidance, you could start to see, human interference in the landscape, and they would use rocks to build terraces. They would build check dams with them because unlike the Hohokam in what is now Phoenix, they weren't irrigating off a river there. They were irrigating from just runoff water. And this would be very rare, and it could also be damaging too. It causes erosion, as you know, and flash flooding. So they would build these rock cairns and they would plant the agave in these cairns. And, here in the photos here, you can see a clonal family of Agave murphyi actually growing in a rock cairn there. And I believe Paul and Susie had planted the original mother plant back in 1985 or sometime in the 1980s. And one of the ways agaves reproduce is by cloning. Not all of them, but a lot of the species do. And that's the way that they're propagating them as a food source and a use for fibers as well. Then the other picture there of those rocks, those are actually tools that they would use to both cut the pencas or leaves of the agave off and strip them of their flesh because they were exposing the fibers. And agave is a very fibrous plant, and they would use those fibers for rope, for textiles, fishing line, all kinds of useful implements that they would get from the agave plant.
Wow. Who
Yeah,
knew
so the
this?
rocks would actually act as a mulch. They would help to hold that rare rainwater in.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what they had the most of in that area there,
And
and
they had lots of them.
lots of rocks in the Sonoran Desert, and it's kind of cool when you know what to look for. When you can start to see these things, you can also see the remains of the roasting pits. They would roast them right out in the fields there. They didn't have beast of burden to carry the agave pinas back to a campsite or their village site. So they would
Oh.
roast them right there in the field and process them right there. And they don't look like pits anymore. They're just flat ground, but you can tell by the color of the soil. It's a little bit ashy, a little darker than the soil around it from being used so many times. And there's also stones there that you can see have been affected by great heat.
Wow. That's really cool. That sounds like a great experience getting a chance to go hang out with these folks.
Yeah, I've been interested in that in quite a while. In fact, researchers have also found a species of agave that had been cultivated for so long by the Hohokam, they actually lost their ability to reproduce sexually, so they don't create viable seeds anymore. They
Oh,
only
wow.
reproduce clonally by these agaves. They'll have a rhizome that forms under the ground, and you'll see these clone little baby plants pop up around it. They call them pups. They call them ihuelos in Mexico, and you can harvest those plants and propagate it that way. That's the most easy way of propagating agave. They're also genetic clones of the mother plant. So in tequila, they've been propagating Tequilana Weber Azul for generations this way, and that's why there's such a problem in tequila right now, is because we have a monoculture. All of the plants are clones of like 6 mother plants. They're all genetically identical, and they're all very genetically weak. It's like the Cavendish banana. So we're kind
Right.
of looking for some pestilence or something to come through and wipe the entire crop off the face of the earth.
So are you saying buy more tequila?
Buy while you can. No,
You can't.
either that or make smart choices when you're buying tequila. Not all brands are created equal, and luckily there are some very few brands that are concerned about I call it, you can say sustainability, but really it's best practices, and it's trying to introduce this genetic diversity back into that monoculture. Unfortunately, the only way you can do that is by letting the plant throw up its inflorescence, what they call a quiote. You've seen agaves where they throw up the giant stalk in the middle,
Right. Yeah.
and allow them to reproduce sexually that way. And this is also a major food source for migratory bats, the lesser long-nosed bat that goes between the United States and Mexico. So they are one of the main pollinators of agave. And that's the only way we're going to introduce the genetic diversity back into the monoculture. Unfortunately, when it gets to that state, the plant is no longer suitable for distillation. So it's basically a loss for those producers. So very few of them are willing, especially now when agave is at its historic high point as far as price goes.
Right.
Very few of them are willing to let a portion of their crop basically lose that for production purposes.
Wow. Yeah, understandable. All right. So what year did Bacanota become legal to produce? 1992?
Yeah. It's been illegal for a very long time. Prohibition wasn't just a thing in the United States. It was throughout Mexico and even back to Nueva España. And there's different reasons for this. Some of them were to basically tamp down competition for imported brandies, Spanish brandies, and stuff like that. The other reason was for basically moral reasons, just like it was in the United States. And it became illegal back in, what was it, 1915 or something like that in Sonora, and remained illegal for all that time. So production never really stopped. It ended up moving into the mountains to the east of the state. And mezcal was produced all over Sonora, but in the east part of the state, there's a little town called Bacanora, and like tequila, Bacanora takes its name from a place. Tequila is actually a town in Jalisco. And you see in the statue here, that's a really famous sculpture that's in the town center of Bacanora. Those two gentlemen there, right behind them, what looks like oil barrels, are actually a still, and that's something that they used heavily in production. Yeah, and there was a few reasons for that. One of them was that they were not as they're cheap, and they were basically you could find them. That wasn't one of the questions, was it?
No, it's not. No.
And no, am I giving away answers here too early? They're cheap. They're easy to come by. They also weren't not nearly as obvious as a copper pot still, in case government agents came poking around.
Right.
So yeah, it's they used them for quite a while. In fact, some producers still do.
All right. What was Pancho Villa's drink of choice? Strawberry soda?
Yeah, it's a funny historical fact that Pancho Villa was actually a teetotaler. He did not drink at all, ever. And he did not allow his soldados to drink. And in fact, he was one of the major forces of prohibition in Mexico. And I mean, I know Pancho Villa has, more to do with Chihuahua, but his shadow looms large all over northern Mexico and also Mexico in general. It's kind of interesting that so much he's such a large figure, even in tequila. I know like Siete Leguas tequila is actually named after his horse. He's kind of this archetype of Mexican machismo.
Right.
And drinking tequila is part of that. So, but he did not. And in those photos you had up, there's that really famous photo of him and several of his generals sitting in the elite confectionery in El Paso, which was his favorite place to go. And he would enjoy a strawberry soda and these chocolate covered ice cream baseballs, they called it. This was, of course, before the raid on Columbus, New Mexico, when he was still welcome in El Paso. But yeah, that was kind of his favorite drink of choice, was a strawberry soda.
All right. Question 5. When did Bacanota receive its DO, and what is... Okay, so let's answer this, which is 2000. But what is a DO?
So a denomination of origin is basically a protection for a product that ties it to a place and a means of production. The most common DOs or appellations of origin that we would know about would be like Champagne in France, or Cognac, or Armagnac, or even Roquefort cheese. It can be a food or beverage product. Even certain peppers have a denomination of origin to Sonora as well. Like chili piquin. So yeah, it's something that ties a particular product to a place, a culture, and a means of production. Now, the first DO outside of Europe was actually tequila's denomination of origin, and that was in 1974. And that tied 5 states in Mexico for tequila production. Mezcal received its later. Bacanora was in 2000. And it's actually not the entire state of Sonora that this denomination of origin covers. It's only 35 municipalities, again, in that mountainous region between Sonora and Chihuahua.
All right.
So
Sotol is...
Sorry, go ahead.
All right. So Sotol is the colloquial term for, I will let you say that.
Dazzlerian?
Yes, Dazzlerian. It sounds like something out of Star Trek. They would have had like Dazzlerian. It's also the name of the spirit produced from that plant and has a DO which includes Mexico, Chihuahua, Coahuila. Am I saying that one right? Probably not. Coahuila, okay. And Durango. What do they call Sotol that is produced in Sonora? Oh, so they don't call it Sotol.
Nope, they can't.
Because of the DO.
That's correct. So they're legally bound to not call it Sotol. So they call it Palmilla, which is means little palm, basically. It's another colloquial name for the plant. The plant is also known as the desert spoon plant here in the United States.
Okay.
Yeah, and they also produce sotol in Oaxaca, but there they call it cucharia or cucharia. So that basically means little spoon. So that's referring to the base of the leaf structure, which forms this hard spoon-like cup. And indigenous people have actually used that for a tool, and they actually make these beautiful decorations in some states in Mexico with that part of the plant. Now, it's interesting because we have a big controversy here in Texas where there are people producing Sotol, but they're calling Sotol here in Texas. And you think, well, it has this denomination of origin. How can that happen? Well, the denominations of origin for tequila and mezcal, those are protected by international treaty. And the one for Sotol actually is not. So while they can enforce that in Mexico and people in Sonora cannot call it Sotol, people in the United States actually can and are. So there's been a big controversy with all of that. These producers here in Texas.
Wow, I can imagine you're like right in the middle of all that. I mean,
no, I try to stay out of the middle of all that.
Well, but I mean, in terms of your business, it's like being aware of that and kind of seeing the argument going on, and it's like, wow.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We only have Mexican spirits on our back bar, so it's kind of a little bit out of our purview. There are also agave distillates that are produced in other parts of the world. They're produced in South Africa. There's produced in India. All these places. Agave is endemic to North America. Most of them are found in Mexico and also the Southwest, like Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. As if you didn't know what the Southwest was, right? But through colonization, people have taken them and planted them in other countries. And the English were really famous for that because they used them for basically for landscaping plants. And they've really done well. They've thrived in the conditions that they've been planted in. There are some people in California that are actually growing and producing an agave spirit. The only thing is they cannot call them legally mezcal or tequila because those DOs are enforced by international law.
So what do they call the stuff that I get? I mean, kind of like, like here we have like Prosecco or sparkling wine, things like that. So what do they call kind of the like the US variants?
It'd be called an agave spirit.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And even in states in Mexico that aren't part of the denomination of origin. And, it's interesting. We're seeing something going on right now. These denominations of origin, they do a lot of good in regulating what something could be produced from. But they're also highly political and problematic in nature in that they exclude certain people that have been producing what they called mezcal for generations. And a lot of people now are foregoing certification through the Consejo Regulador del Mezcal and the Consejo Regulador del Tequila, the CRM and the CRT, because they either don't fall in one of those places where it's in a DO state, or they don't want to conform to their regulations. And some of them are very arbitrary, and this goes down to even methanol levels. Traditionally made mezcal typically has higher methanol content than non, and it's not enough to harm you, but they do have a limit on this when they do their chemical analysis of the spirit. So they would call those destilado de agave. sometimes aguardiente de agave. Aguardiente is a word that just means firewater, basically. Some rums in Mexico are called, aguardiente de caña. So more and more we're seeing people foregoing this. Back in the day, it used to be if it didn't say tequila on the bottle, it was basically a death sentence for your spirit brand.
Right.
But now we have a far more educated and curious consumer body that is interested in exploring some of these lesser known and incredibly unique distillates. So they would most likely call it destilado de agave in Mexico and agave spirit here elsewhere in the world.
All right. So we kind of hinted at this, but what year was Prohibition instituted right here in Arizona? That wasn't long after it became a state, 1915.
Yeah, full 5 years before national prohibition. Arizona went dry, sort of.
We're number one. We're number one.
Yeah, and the talk about prohibition in Arizona and Sonora and northern Mexico really goes back to the research I was doing and the article I was writing, because what was amazing to find from that, for me, what I found was how well known these Mexican distillates would have been to people in southern Arizona in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was really these prohibitions that you find it disappearing, and being basically forgotten about for decades after that. And now we're seeing this resurgence. For me, one of the exciting things about Mexican distillates is kind of a celebration of regionality. And in Sonora and Arizona, you have this beautiful culture that transcends borders, via foodways, via spirits. And, when I was growing up in Arizona, not everybody really celebrated it there so much, but I'm happy to see now places that are really celebrating this cultural tie with Sonora. You have the restaurant Bacanota that just opened up in Phoenix not too long ago and has gained national recognition and everything through their celebration of the culinary influences of Sonora and also their selection of Sonoran spirits. And I'm quite jealous. I mean, it's we have our own here with Chihuahua as well, but it's a beautiful thing, and it's something that should be celebrated.
Right. And you're starting to see that now, especially here in the Valley. You're starting to see much more regionalization in terms of restaurants, not just Mexico City and Sonoran, but I mean, it's like Chihuahuan restaurants, you've got Oaxacan restaurants, you've got all these varieties that are playing back to those regionalities of food, as well as the beverages.
Yeah, we all grew up with this, idea of what Mexican food was. That was really kind of an Americanized version of Mexican food. Right. And the depth and richness of culinary Mexico is almost endless. And traveling to these different states has been a wonderful thing for me because I love food just like I love spirits. And to experience these foodways, in Oaxaca, where they have all of these beautiful pre-Hispanic foodways that are still, widely celebrated there and part of their culture. Michoacan the same way. Like each region has its own history and culture of that, and I'm glad to see more of that popping up all over the United States.
Well, and I guess as long as we're talking about food, we should give a shout out to Barrio Cafe and Chef Silvana, who has been rated not just only the best in Arizona, but now the best Mexican in the country, in the U.S., because of her playing with food and so many different regionalities and bringing those to one restaurant. So,
yeah. Sorry. I used to live right up the street from Barrio Cafe, actually, right off of 16th Street in Earl. There is where I lived, and the original one was just down the road. And Chef Silvana, actually, she came through Dallas here and came to our Mescaleria, so it was kind of fun to reconnect with her. And she was actually on a barbecue tour at the time, but But yeah,
I was watching that on Facebook, her barbecue tour. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, she has always been one of those people that have pushed the culinary bounds for people to accept more than, what we grew up used to
Right.
as Mexican food. And it's also played such an amazing part of the community there. And, the collection of murals now on all the walls around that Barrio Cafe is beautiful. It's like an outdoor art gallery. And I love the one of my old friend Mike Ochoa, who passed away, unfortunately, recently. That's now gracing the wall there. So I have a lot of respect for her and what she's done, both in the food scene and the community in general.
Right. Very much so. An activist on so many levels.
Indeed.
All right. Where was the only tequila ever produced outside of Mexico distilled at? Nogales,
Arizona. Yeah, this was a kind of a surprise. Right after Prohibition ended, some entrepreneurs basically built a tequila distillery. It was actually one of the former mayors of Nogales was one of the owners of the company, and one of the Orendine family, the very famous Orendine family from Jalisco, was supplying them with agave and also, I'm sure, distillation knowledge. And in 1936, they produced the first barrel of tequila, and they could call it tequila back then because it wasn't protected by denomination of origin. And in those photos you had up there, you see that barrel right there. And on top of that, that's actually a roasted agave pina that's sitting on top of it.
I was wondering what that was.
Yeah. So that's actually a roasted pina, and they call it a pina because it looks like a pineapple once you cut all the leaves off the agave plant. And so they started distilling. Now, they didn't last very long. Nobody knows exactly why, but I know that the owner had a couple of accidents. He ended up losing an eye because of an equipment mishap in the distillery itself. But it just became this interesting little footnote. Their motto was a toast of two nations. And, when I was doing this research, some of the interesting things I was uncovering, I expected to find a lot about smuggling and also importing legally. But I found so many mentions of quote unquote mezcal distilleries that were supposed to have been built. One of those was supposed to have been built in Tombstone, Arizona. This would have been in like 1881. One of them was supposed to be built in Bisbee. I did not find any evidence of them ever actually building them or producing any agave spirits there, but it was kind of cool to see the mentions of them and that people were thinking about building them. And they also mentioned that they were actually exporting agave from Arizona into Sonora to produce mezcal. So that was kind of a fascinating thing. Yeah. So, Arizona has several species of agave that are endemic to it that you can actually use to produce agave spirits. Not all agave species are you're able to produce from. Some of them have too low of a Brix or sugar content. Some of them have different chemical compounds that don't make it a very pleasant spirit. But there are several species in Arizona, and it would be intuitive to think that it was produced there, but there's basically no physical evidence of it ever being done. You hear anecdotal evidence, and now going through the newspaper archives, you see a lot of mentions of them actually producing them and descriptions of what they would call mezcal camps. Back when I lived in Arizona and I was dealing in Mexican antiques and folk art, I would drive down to Nogales all the time and buy from a gentleman down there who would travel throughout Mexico. And I'd always stop by this little bar on the side of the road in the town of Tumacacori, right across from the ruined mission down there.
You've been inside? Every time I go, it's always closed.
Yeah, so I've been going there for decades, and Abe's Old Tumacacori Bar. And it's a beautiful little bar. It's still run by the family. They're back open again after being closed for COVID and such.
Nice.
But when I first started going there, the son of the owner was actually running the place, and he would tell me stories about his father who built it, and how he would have tequila basically come up on the backs of burros from Mexico. But he also said that they were buying from people that were producing all around southern Arizona there, which I thought was fascinating. But yeah, that kind of piqued my interest in that. And I still go by there whenever I get a chance, rare chance to get down to that part of the world. But it is a special little place to me.
I have always seen it, and I love the signs around it. The fact they still have an A1 beer sign outside.
Yeah.
I mean, from the outside, I can only imagine how beautiful the inside looks. So
Yeah,
hopefully at some point I'll actually get a chance to go inside.
Yeah, it was all original when I first started going there, and he was also an amateur taxidermist, so he had really bad taxidermy all over the place that were missing the eyes. He had this
Oh, that's
awful.
even more reason to go.
Yeah, those are gone, unfortunately, but it still has all the old bar back advertisement from the 1940s in the bar, and this really cool alcove where the jukebox is with this longhorn skull on top of it, and the old thatch ceiling on the inside. And there's some historic photos of it. I think some were taken by Russell Lee, actually, that show it kind of its different incarnations over the years, but it is pretty close to original.
Wow. I definitely now need to find out what their hours are next time I go and make sure I make that window.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the trip.
All right. So how many species of agave can Bacanora be produced from? 1?
That's correct. There's only one species per the DO that Bacanora could be produced from. Originally,
Oh.
there's probably been several. It's kind of like tequila in that by law, tequila can only be made from one type of agave, which is the Tequilana Weber Azul or blue agave. This one is Agave angustifolia. It's known as Agave pacifica or Agave yaquiana as well in different regions of Sonora. But it's a beautiful agave. It's funny down in the angustifolia species is the most used species in mezcal production. There's 3 reasons for this: relatively low maturation period. It's in the ground for only about 6 to 10 years, as opposed to some agave species that can be in the ground for up to 35 years or more, depending on the species, before they're ready to be mature enough and have enough bricks content to produce from. It's easy to propagate. We talked about that a little while ago. So it throws up a lot of these pups, these ihuelos, and it's easy to propagate this. And it has a very high sugar content, has a very high bricks content. So you end up getting a lot of spirit out of it when you produce it. So yeah, the tequila, they can only be made from this one type of agave now.
Wow. All right. So question 10, which spirit did Julius Goldbaum import into Tucson in the 19th century to rebottle under his own labels? He did all of those?
Yeah, he was what was known as a rectifier. So he would buy raw whiskey in bulk from Kentucky and other states, and he would basically cut them. He would blend them as rectifiers do, and rebottle them under his own proprietary labels. In those photos there, you saw one of the bottles of whiskey. It's one of the most prized back bar bottles for collectors, the 6-star bottle there. He had a real eye for graphic design and promotion, as well as good spirits. The other cool label there is actually his Mezcal Bacanora label. So he was actually importing tequila and Bacanora up from Sonora and from Jalisco, and doing the same thing. He didn't change those. He would basically import them in bulk and then rebottle them. And that's about it with those. So in my research, he became a really prominent figure. And he was a really enterprising early figure in Tucson, for owning saloons. He owned imported food stores. Really, really interesting guy. And it said that he was supposed to build a distillery there in Tucson, but I never found any evidence that he actually did. But he was an interesting character. His father was actually murdered by Geronimo's band when he went to try to do some mining. So he ended up just staying in Tucson there, where he had a fairly long career in the late 19th and early 20th century, basically selling booze to people.
Wow. All right. And now we are up for our last and final, our bonus question, because I know people are talking about how this has been a really tougher than usual happy hour. And so, surprisingly, Prohibition did not stop people from drinking. But in the Barrio Vieja area of Tucson, a specific time of establishment opened up to cater to those who did want to drink. And they were called Tequila Kitchens.
Yeah, this is a really interesting and specific type of establishment that was, back then it would have been known as Barrio Libre. And it was much larger than what it is today. They tore down a lot of it to build that civic center there. But they would have these establishments were basically run by widows and other women, and they were basically boarding houses. And for a price of a night, they would leave a bottle of tequila out that you could have access to. Now, they said that they controlled the amount that you drank very highly because, if one of their boarders got drunk and wandered out into the streets, this story comes from a real interesting article about a guy named Jesus Camacho, who was known as the mayor of Meyers Street. And he was a deputy there, and he basically ran that whole Barrio Viejo area. And if he caught one of your clients drunk, he would come and he would knock on your door and tell you better not be doing that anymore. And if you did, then you would be in big trouble with him after that. So it's a fascinating little mention. I really love the name Tequila Kitchens. Of course, there were speakeasies as well, as there were everywhere.
Right.
But yeah, I found in an 1881 Tucson City Directory a great quote about Barrio Libre, if I may. It quotes, it says, "It means free zone, and in earlier times was allowed to remain without legal restraints or the presence of a policeman. Here, the mescalian could imbibe his fill, and either male or female could, in peaceful intoxication, sleep on the sidewalks or in the middle of the streets, with all their ancient rights respected." That was his quote, and I love the name mescalian. I've never heard it.
Exactly. I'm like, I feel like I should get like a little name badge that says mescalian.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or bar name, anyway.
Or a stamp on my passport.
Yeah, it talks about. Yeah, so it's a really beautiful part of Tucson, and it has such a rich history down there. And Tucson was a major distribution hub for all of these illicit, during Prohibition, all of the tequila and a lot of the other spirits that were being smuggled in ended up in Tucson and were distributed through there. The firemen and brakemen on the railroad, there was the Sonoran line, also known as the Burro line. They would smuggle bottles in the cabs of the engines, and then distribute them there in Tucson. And a lot of them went to these ladies that ran those tequila kitchens or those boarding houses. So, yeah, Tucson was a very wet town, always.
So I always love to end with how did people do, and I see people already cut to the chase. But I love Anita's line. So she says, "Never happier to do so bad." Because of all the great stories. Oh my gosh. So, Shad, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I mean, you did so much research for this article. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's been it was just something I was doing on my own, and I contacted a friend of mine who's an editor at Arizona Highways to see if they'd even be interested in something like this, and she said yes for their online publication. They'd be interested in it. She asked for 500 to 700 words. I ended up giving them 3,000. That's after cutting out 600 already. It's a very long and intricate story. So that's supposed to be published, and luckily they're going to publish it in 2 parts because they couldn't really find enough that they could cut out that wouldn't be essential to the actual article.
Right.
So I'm not a writer. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not an ethnobotanist. I'm just a bar owner, and
a drinker.
And a drinker, yes. Salute to that. And Arizona history and Old West history and Mexican history has always fascinated me. So it was a lot of fun to do, and I hope when it is published, people will enjoy it.
I think so. So, Shad, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I mean, people now start looking for that article. I'm sure it's like it'll probably be coming out probably in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, very good. Well, again, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your night.
Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. Salud.
Salud. All right. Oh, wow. That was so much fun. And indeed, cheers, salute, chin chin. All right. So now we're doing From the Vault. And so, we're doing a little bit of, you might have noticed that we've covered Adeline Gray numerous times. So I think one of the most amazing things is from her is we know her first name. It's like so many women of that era would have been Mrs. Columbus Gray, but she was very much Adeline, and it was touted that her husband was lucky enough to be married to Adeline, and everybody knew Adeline. And so they rolled downtown 1868 today. And so they had land over on 7th Street in Mojave, from 7th Street over to Central and further south towards the river. And so they wound up building, they first lived in a tent, built an adobe hut they lived in for a while that no longer stands. But they built the first luxury mansion in Phoenix at 7th Street in Mojave. Now there's nothing left of it. And she was such a community-minded person. It's talked about how she would have, if people needed a place to get married, she would offer up her house. She told the gentlemen of the town that the first building they should build should be a school, and they need to pay that teacher more than the going rate because they needed to get good education. She was known to give up her fine linens for women to come and give birth on. So she was very much a stalwart of the community. And I think it's so interesting that when you look at that community now, you would not expect that that's where you had a luxury mansion. She was such an amazing person. There is now there was a school named for her that no longer is named for her. It was the Adeline Gray Elementary School, part of Phoenix Union. There is now a apartment building downtown, just down from the Fries, that is named for her as well. And so that's actually where this picture comes from, as well as that photo of her. So there you go. You drive down 7th Street in Mojave and you never know what you're going to find. So now you'll see why I always say, if you're watching on Facebook, you should click on that share button because we have so much fun with Arizona history, and you should definitely share that around with folks. Next week, we have my friend Christy Lynn. So Christy is also known as Pyra Sutra. She is a burlesque dancer, and her family is one of the pioneer Mormon families. And so I think we're getting a little bit of kind of her entertainment history as well as Mesa history as well. That is next Thursday, same time, 7 p.m., that will be a really fun show as well. So remember, if you have any questions, please reach out. You can either in the chat or there's various other ways, because I love to hear from you. That's where I get my best stuff. So as we get ready to say goodnight, I want to give a huge shout out always to Chris and Cole, who did that amazing video to start with. And as we say goodnight, PJ, thank you so much for cocktail recommendations. Oh, you really make every week a little palate teaser. I never quite know what's coming down my tongue until suddenly it hits. So again, thank you all so much. And as we get ready to say goodnight, we are going to leave. I'm going to leave you with a kind of a montage of, this is from Chevy's Road to Romance.
Chevrolet presents Oak Creek Canyon, land of the mystic red rock. Deep in the rocky folds of Arizona's Indian country, where sun and sky and steep crags jut into the horizon, is Oak Creek Canyon. This is a place of parched roadbeds that suddenly become swollen with torrential rains that race into lively rivulets to provide sport for the fisherman tourist. It's a place where snow-capped peaks register Arctic temperature, and just 30 miles away is the tropic heat of the lowlands. This skyscraper of stone is nearly 200 million years old. Oak Creek Canyon once was a raging, turbulent sea. Yet as the waters disappeared and earth movements raised the structure of the land, beautiful carvings in stone, like Castle and Bell Rock, appeared out of the depths. Here, the Old West, with its beautiful background, comes to life, and even the most timid of the tourists ventures forth with enthusiasm for that first ride into the hill country. Spanish explorers, viewing this canyon for the first time, named it Verde, the Green Valley. And rising up from it stands the Castle of Montezuma, king of the ancient Indian peoples. The Indians called this spot Tuzagut, Bend in the River. Nestled in the valley is this famous old frontier town of Jerome, whose history was written in the language of gunpowder and six-shooters. You and your family can enjoy the vacation thrills of this fabulous land, and no matter where you live, you can reach it quickly, comfortably, and with the utmost economy. Travel this year the roads to romance, to places you have always wanted to go. And when you travel, go in one of the quality motor cars your Chevrolet dealer has to offer. It will be your magic carpet to the land of your heart's desire.